I mean, take a look at you and me. You chose books. I chose looks.
What's shaking? My name's Cam, welcome back to another video. It's no secret that I'm quite an easy man to please. When it comes to fantasy books, I hand out 4 and 5 star reviews, like that one guy in the friend group who buys everyone drinks on his payday. Yeah, what are you drinking, mate? Nah, this round's on me, champion. $300. Yeah, righto, no worries. Here's me card. My point is that there are very few fantasy books or series that I hate or I would rate poorly. If the story is interesting or if the characters seem genuine enough, I can easily look past things like a cliche here and there, or even gratuitous instances of family bonding. But I'm not all sunshine and rainbow sport. Sometimes I have to put my foot down and say, enough is, hey, that's enough. Here's the line, guy, and you're over there. You're past it. Please don't read into it too deep or be one of those people that takes this as a personal attack if you see a fantasy series in this video that you happen to like. I promise you, there is not one YouTuber on the planet who has gotten a comment saying, "Hey asshole, you're actually wrong about bananas in pajamas at the beach. That book was revolutionary," and thought to themselves, "Wow, this angry random commenter is right. Guess I'll delete my whole channel and whip myself out of shame." I'm going to get the most controversial one out of the way first. I'm sorry, please hear me out. The Dark Tower series by Stephen King. I just don't see myself ever reading it. If you've seen my recent video about Stephen, you'll know that I'm a fan of his writing. In particular, his short stories. I feel like that's where he really works best. And I fully expected to love this series when I started reading it. I read The Gunslinger like years ago, but I don't know what to tell you. I didn't like it. The Gunslinger felt like the Thor, the Dark World of fantasy books. There were characters with great potential, but ultimately I left the story bored, confused, and the experience as a whole was just very forgettable. A few days after finishing it, I just honestly couldn't remember almost anything that had happened in the 300 pages that I read, other than a guy following another guy through the desert. With that said, I can appreciate that this series would probably be very fun for people who love Stephen King and have read all his books, because as I understand it, the series is actually a bridge between all of his other more iconic series. I've heard that The Dark Tower bridges a lot of Stephen King's stories into a kind of connected universe. That in itself is sick. I love that. It's like Brandon Sanderson's Cosmere. Authors having a connected universe for all their stories to take place in is something that I hope happens a lot more in the future. I think that's just great. It's a really awesome way to reward people who have read a lot of your books. Giving your fans like Easter eggs and crossover moments is just, it's brilliant. And I'm not opposed to stepping outside of traditional fantasy. If anything, I would like to see that happen a lot more. But there was very little in the first book in the series that I recognized as having Stephen King's edge. I was going to go see the movie so that I could pretend that I'm one of the fantasy guys when people start talking about The Gunslinger, but apparently they all hate the movie anyway, so the book felt a little like one of the more somber moments from a Stephen King book, dragged out into 50,000 words. Maybe you had a different experience with it. I would be interested to know, especially if you enjoyed it without being an existing Stephen King fan, because that would genuinely surprise me. Next up is a series that I was actually really excited for, but I ended up being pretty let down by the first book in the series, and that was the Dark Star trilogy by Marlon James, the first book being Black Leopard Red Wolf. It's difficult for me to explain my feelings about this book because I both respect what the author was doing, but also hate the product. I would like to think that I don't use the word hate lightly, but I really did hate Black Leopard Red Wolf. Ironically, it was on my list of most anticipated reads for 2019, because my hope was that having a fantasy that wasn't focused on Eurocentric, like medieval Europe settings and tropes would really shake up the industry. You know, maybe set a trend for the future of fantasy and force authors to be more interesting and creative with what they come up with. We were told that it would draw from African mythology, and it does, rather than the same old stuff that we've been seeing for God knows how long, you know, like elves and dwarves and all that stuff. That part is true. What I can say for Marlon James is that he is extremely talented with his use of descriptive prose, or with setting up a scene or a location or describing a creature. The parts of the book where the characters enter a new, beautiful part of the world was just breathtaking. It sucked me right in. The writing was amazing there. Marlon James, I think, at least technically speaking, is a good writer. Unfortunately, there wasn't a whole lot else that I liked. And even more unfortunately, I don't think it was just me not liking these things because it wasn't my taste. I think it was me not liking things that I think are just bad. Firstly, the insanely confusing structure and pacing. There were so many time skips and false starts with that book that I cannot imagine how anyone could keep up with what's actually going on without keeping like a notepad to take notes along the way. I've heard people say that this was an attempt to try something new and like really experiment with the typical story structure, which is fine, but this isn't something that hasn't been tried before. It's been tried before, it just didn't work and it didn't catch on because it's not good to purposely confuse people for no reason. This type of story structure doesn't work because it's more confusing without any added benefit. The characters were great, they had a lot of personality and you could really distinctively pull one out from the crowd, but they would randomly appear and disappear for long stretches of time for seemingly no reason. The main character, Tracker, was one of the biggest aspects of the book that I was disappointed by because he didn't seem to have any genuine motivation for anything that he was doing during the story. Worst of all, there was just way too much... how do I say this? The word that rhymes with tape but starts with an R. Really trying to work with YouTube on this one. I'm not opposed to dark subject matter in books, I promise you, especially in adult fantasy. I don't think that topic, you know, that I mentioned before, should be off bounds, but I do think it should serve some kind of purpose. And I can tell you 100% that there are multiple instances in this book where that's just not the case. It's sometimes mentioned in graphic detail to introduce a character that is gone by the next page. I feel bad giving so many negatives about Black Leopard Red Wolf because in a lot of ways it's well written. Like I said, I do want there to be a fantasy that breaks the mold. I do want more fantasies that steer away from typical Eurocentric tropes, but I just can't get on board for this particular series. A lot of people liked it and normally I would be like, hey, that's cool, you know, everyone's different. It's probably just not for me. But when it comes to Black Leopard Red Wolf, when I think about pretty much any of the creative decisions that Marlon James made in writing this, I just find myself asking, why? Here's one that I'm on the fence about. I might read it one day. I don't know, I might change my mind. If you asked me to read it now, I would probably say not likely, but that may change. The infamous Wheel of Time series, written by the late great Robert Jordan and now picked up by Brandon Sanderson. The rumor is that if you say Wheel of Time 3 times, Daniel Green will appear and ask you if you've read it yet. I can't think of many fantasy series that I'm more interested in than this one. From what I've heard, it's the exact type of whimsical, epic, world-changing adventure I usually jump right on board for. I usually chase that rush like Bilbo boot scooting it from the Shire. So what's the problem? 3 words. It's heckin' long. It scares the shit out of me. It's intimidating, my guy. The first book was written like 30 years ago and since then there have been 13 more, totaling nearly 4.5 million words. Reading this entire series would take about as much effort as like raising a child. Probably. I don't know. It's a big series, and as much as I would like to be included in the fandom, I just don't know if I can commit to that. I think I need a bit more training first, maybe after I'm done mentally bench pressing the titan that is the Stormlight Archive. After I get through the Cosmere, maybe I'll be ready to take a stab at the Wheel of Time, but for the foreseeable future, I don't really have any plans to do that. Next up is The Mortal Instruments by Cassandra Clare, and I'll let you know now, it's not for any particularly, bad reasons. The plot sounds fine, not explicitly my type of thing, to be honest, but it's fine. And I know the series is huge on BookTube. There's a lot of people who ride hard for these books, so I'm sure the story's great, I'm sure it's well written. The reason that I know I won't read it, it's actually kind of funny, it's a little bit petty, but I'll admit it. It's a bit dumb. The plot doesn't really spark my interest. Sure, but that hasn't stopped me from reading a book before. Sometimes I'm even surprised by how much I like a book despite not having any interest in the plot from reading the back, the blurb. The reason I don't want to read any of these Shadowhunter books is because I've seen the advertisements for the show on Netflix a million times and it looks kind of goofy. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. If you like the show, I'm sorry. There's plenty of shows I like that you can tease me about. Hell, I've made it all the way through Glee twice, so who the hell am I to talk? Harry Shum Jr. is in both of those shows, by the way. But it does. Something about all the promotional stuff I've seen for the Shadowhunter show, it just kind of has that, that Riverdale vibe, you know what I mean? Like when adults try to guess what kids think is edgy. The tattoos look super fake. Every photo I've seen of the cast looks like some kind of punk rock band from the early 2000s. It just turned me off the series. What can I say? I could be wrong. The show and the books could be brilliant. Maybe they could change my life and cure global warming. I don't know. Guess we'll never find out. So those are just some of the fantasy series that I do not see myself reading, either now or in the near future. Let me know what you think. Am I wrong about Black Leopard Red Wolf? Is Shadowhunters actually cool enough for every cast member to wear a leather jacket? Leave a comment. I make weekly videos about fantasy and horror books and stories, so if that's your kind of thing, I would love it if you stuck around. Thanks for watching, especially for watching through the whole video. I really do appreciate it. Catch ya.